Hey, it's Walt from Big Guys Can. This is part two of my three-part series on how I rode the Great Allegheny Passage, the Gap Trail, and I bike packed from Cumberland, Maryland to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The part one of the series was the prep and how the trip came about, the history behind it. This part two is going to be actually day one of my trip. So if you didn't see the first part, you don't care about how I prep for it, you just want to see the trip, this is where you want to start. Let's get started. So I'm going to start this off by just giving a recap and a short history of how this trip came about. I was planning on hiking the Laurel Highlands hiking trail. It's a hiking trail from Ohio Powell State Park to Johnstown, Pennsylvania. It's a 70-mile trail, and I was going to do it in sections. And I bought some hiking equipment, backpacking equipment, and I had planned on taking a few weekends this summer and doing the Laurel Highlands Trail. The problem was I was having problems with my back. My back was cramping up. My lower right side of my body was cramping up, and the more I hiked, the more it was cramping. My doctors told me that I should get some more exercise, try to get out more, and lose some weight. So I started riding my bike. And through this process, I realized that my back didn't hurt. It was when I was riding my bike, it didn't matter if it was 1 mile or 60 miles, my back felt good. So my hiking and backpacking trip turned into a bike packing trip that I was going to take, since I wanted to get out and do something and set a goal. So I decided I'm going to ride the Great Allegheny Passage. And that's what brings us to today. Day one of my bike packing trip, I got dropped off in Cumberland. The reason I chose Cumberland to start my trip was two reasons. First reason was logistically, for my family to drop me off. I want to make it at least of a hassle for them. And my two options were riding to Pittsburgh and riding from Pittsburgh to Cumberland, or getting dropped off in Cumberland and riding to Pittsburgh. 75% of the people, 80% of the people ride from Pittsburgh to Cumberland. The slope and gradual incline from Pittsburgh to Cumberland, you're doing 2,000 feet of elevation over 125 miles. So it's a really gradual incline. So you start from Pittsburgh and you ride gradually uphill the whole time. You don't really even notice it because it's such a slight gradual uphill for 125 miles until you get to the Eastern Continental Divide. Then you ride the last 25 miles downhill as a breeze. It's like, you don't basically have to pedal riding 25 miles down into Cumberland. And a lot of people like it that way. But as for me, I like riding the hard part first and getting it out of the way. I always like riding uphill or hiking uphill. So when I'm done with that uphill climb, I know everything's downhill from there. What I mean by that is, I figured if I ride 25 miles uphill to the Eastern Continental Divide, then it's downhill for 125 miles into Pittsburgh. Not totally downhill, but a slight downhill grade. For the most part, you're riding downhill for the next 2 days. So I started this. I planned it as a 3-day trip, and so I decided I'm going to ride from Cumberland to Pittsburgh. Logistically, it's easier for my family to drop me off in Cumberland. Mentally, once I knew I was up that 25 miles, that I was going to be able to ride downhill for the rest of the trip. And it's not a downhill from the Eastern Continental Divide to Pittsburgh. It's not a downhill where I can just coast 125 miles. You still have to pedal, and there's still uphills you have to go, but they're very gradual, and but mentally for me, I knew if I got up that, it's about 2,200 feet of elevation, and once I got up that 2,200 feet of elevation, I'm coasting downhill in my mind. So I get dropped off at the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad, which is right in the middle of Cumberland. It is where the Great Allegheny Passage Trail and the C&O Canal Trail meet. They meet right in Cumberland. So there's actually a bike trail that goes from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Washington, D.C. The first half of it is the Great Allegheny Passage. It goes from Pittsburgh to Cumberland. It's 150-something miles. And right in Cumberland, the trail meets with the C&O Canal towpath, which is about 180 miles from Cumberland to Washington, D.C. The two trails are connected, but they're kind of different. The Gap Trail is a crushed limestone, well-maintained almost road, real wide, and it's very well maintained crushed limestone. The CNO Canal Trail is more of a historic towpath, and it's a little bit more rugged of a trail, a bike trail, and there's parts of it that are narrow and just some different stuff you have to worry about, where, like, a little bit more mud and the terrain's just a little bit different on the road. But so I'm riding the Gap Trail. I'm riding from Cumberland to Pittsburgh. I'm planning this trip using a website called gaptrail.org. I mentioned it in the previous video, but the gaptrail.org is the reason why I took this trip. It was an interactive map. It planned out my whole route, told you where to stop at, where, like where there were stops, where there's bed and breakfasts, where there's restaurants, where there was a bike shops, where there's shuttle services. It's a plethora of knowledge. Anything about the Great Allegheny Passage you can think of, you can probably find it on this website. Plus, it tells you about information. Like, there was a trail closure, and I'll get into that on the next part of this. But I knew there was going to be a trail closure on mile marker 91 to 93 or something like that, right around there. That there had to be a shuttle service around this closure on the trail. They were redoing a gas line that ran underneath the trail near Connellsville, somewhere out there. And so the gaptrail.org notified me that way in advance that there's going to be a closure. There's going to be a shuttle service. It's free, and it just helped out a lot. And the gaptrail.org is a great place to find all the knowledge about the Gap Trail. So as I start my ride out of Cumberland, Maryland, I know my next 25 miles are going to be the make or break for this whole trip. My bike is packed down with all my gear. It's heavy, and I start this climb. Now, I've made this climb twice before. I made a 13-mile section of the climb the first 3 weeks before I left, and then a week before I left, I made a 16-mile climb into Frostburg, Maryland, just as test runs. And so previously I made it to Frostburg, Maryland, which is 16 miles in, and I rode back. So mentally I knew that I was 3/4 of the way up this mountain already. I've done it twice. I'm ready to go. So I start out in Cumberland, and I'm climbing this hill. Your first thing you come to is about 7 miles in, you come to a tunnel. It's a brush tunnel, and it's not a very long tunnel, but it's long enough where you should put a headlight on so people passing you in there can see you. Plus depth perception in a tunnel was my hardest thing to get past. If you didn't have a light, it's a lot harder to ride through a tunnel than it is just to walk through a tunnel because of my vision and stuff, the depth perception in a tunnel. So I do recommend lights on your bike, headlamps or lights on your bike. So the brush tunnel is at mile marker 7. And then the next thing you're going to come up to is a bunch of scenic overlooks. The scenic overlooks are great because you're coming up the Savage Mountain. And when you start your journey down in Cumberland, you're coming up through the valley. You can see the hillside to the right of you. And you're riding along this hillside, and you're way down on the mountain. You see this mountain looming below you. You're below the mountain. You're down here, and the top of the mountain's here. And as you're gradually climbing up, you're coming up the mountain. And so that's how you kind of know, like, when you're getting towards the top of the mountain. So you're 7 miles in to this ride, you get to this tunnel, and you start coming up this hill. You come to a bunch of scenic overlooks, and the scenic overlooks, I mean, they're beautiful. It's farm country, and you'll see some like little ponds and stuff, and it's just a really beautiful ride. So it's, if you've never done that section of it, either if you want to ride from the top down or the bottom up, it's a beautiful section of the ride. It's breathtaking at points. As you get towards the top of the mountain, and if you're there on the right day, so I was there on a Friday morning, and I was there a little bit early, so I didn't see any. But previously, the 2 rides I took were on Sundays, and they have these things there. They're like railroad cars, but they're bikes. They're rail bikes, they call them. But it's they ride down from Frostburg to Cumberland, and they're pedal powered rail cars. They ride right down the train tracks, and they look like a lot of fun. So once I got to Frostburg, I knew there was switchbacks up to actually the town of Frostburg, and that's where the bed and breakfast and restaurants are. But I was just going to hang out. There's a little covered, like, looks like an old train depot there with benches and water fountains. And I ended up talking to a few nice guys. They were riding from DC to Pittsburgh. There was 4 or 5 of them, and they're like, "Man, you're almost to the top of the hill. This is like the worst part of the ride, but you're doing great. You know, keep it up." And they were inspiring and really nice. And like I said, I met a lot of nice people along the way. But these guys were saying, most of the people travel the other way, but they always prefer going from DC to Pittsburgh, because once you're up the hill, at the top of the Eastern Continental Divide, it's an easy ride to Pittsburgh. So that gave me a lot of hope and really comforted me, knowing that I made the right decision for me. So I leave Frostburg, fill my water bottles up, and I start up the hill again. The next thing you come to about mile marker 18 is the Borden Tunnel. The Borden Tunnel is a small tunnel, and as I'm going past that, it's just another place where you should probably have a light on your bike or a headlamp, at least something where. So as I start up from the Borden Tunnel, as I start up to the next point that I knew I was going to hit, the anticipation was growing, because I have never seen this part of the trail before. I didn't really know what to expect, but I knew what was coming, and that was like the part that I was looking forward to the most. It's the top of this mountain. The first thing you come to in mile marker 20 is the Mason-Dixon line. The Mason-Dixon line is in 1763 to 1766, somewhere around there. Mason and Dixon were 2 surveyors, and they were surveying for a land dispute between Maryland and Pennsylvania. So the Mason-Dixon line is an actual line running along the Gap Trail. You can see there's a couple boulders there, a couple places to sit, some granite rocks, and there's an actual line of the Maryland-Pennsylvania border. So you can sit with 1 foot on each side. So I sat there for a while and just kind of taking it in and thinking about the history of the how they surveyed this in the 1700s and how hard it would have been for them to do that back then, with just on horseback basically, and how this terrain's pretty intense, especially at that time of history. But as I was sitting there, I'm like, I drank a lot of water on the way up the hill, but I knew I was losing electrolytes and I needed to eat something small. So I watched a lot of YouTubers, and they all promote this drink called LMNT. It's a electrolyte replacement drink. So I ended up ordering some for my trip, and I tried it, and surprisingly it was very good. And they had some crazy flavors, some normal flavors, but it's a real salty additive you add to your water to replace your electrolytes. And at that point I was drinking a habanero chili mango drink mix. It was kind of different, like spicy on your lips, but it was refreshing, and I knew I was replacing my electrolytes, so I wanted to do that because it was warm. It was warm that day. It was hot, and I was sweating a lot, so I wanted to make sure I was replacing my electrolytes. And I had a Stinger energy waffle, which I saw these guys eating them. They said how good they were, so I saw them at Walmart, and I bought some, and they were just like a little like waffle cone stuff, but it's energy bars, and I could feel a difference instantly. Like I felt better, and I was at the top of Mason-Dixon line, and I'm like ready to go. So I know my next part of the journey is going to be the most exciting part for the day, and that was the Big Savage Tunnel area. So I get to the scenic overlook of mile 22 for the Big Savage Tunnel, and it's usually where everybody takes your pictures. Coming from Pittsburgh to Cumberland is the last kind of stop before Cumberland, and it's beautiful. It's a huge overlook area. There's benches there, and there's people all sitting there taking pictures. And as I get there, I realize, man, I'm almost there. I'm almost at the top. And as people were taking pictures, I'm kind of rushing through it because I want to get into that tunnel. The Big Savage Tunnel is this huge, long tunnel cut through the side of a mountain where there's these big, huge metal doors on both sides of the tunnel that are closed times of the year. So I think in November, the end of November, the Big Savage Tunnel closes for the year and won't open until spring. But as I enter the tunnel, like I said, it's about 85 degrees, about 11 o'clock in the morning, and I'm sweating and I'm hot, and I can feel the cold air coming out of this tunnel as I'm riding into it. So I'm going to show you a little video here of me riding through the tunnel. It's kind of blurry because I didn't have a good camera. I was just taping from my cell phone, but as I'm going through the tunnel here, like, I'm cold, like to the point where I'm shivering. I almost stopped. If I wouldn't have saw the light at the end of the tunnel, I would have stopped and put my jacket on because I was that cold at that point. Because, like I said, I was sweating really bad, and it was 85 degrees outside. And you go from 85 degrees to like 55, 65 degree inside the tunnel, and you're in there for a while. I think it's 3/4 of a mile long. This tunnel. It's pretty big. It's a really long tunnel. So you're going through this tunnel, and it's lit up inside, but I still needed my lights on my bike, and the whole time, my smile's just getting bigger and bigger on my face. And if you'd have been riding with me, you'd probably thought I was crazy because I was giggling and laughing, because I knew at that point I am almost to the top of the mountain. And for me, the last couple months planning this trip, that was the scariest part to me, is climbing that hill. It's 2,000 some feet of elevation, and I'm almost to the top. As I come out the other side of the tunnel, I'm just giggling and laughing, and I ride the next 2 miles to the Eastern Continental Divide.
And there it is. Eastern Continental Divide. I did it. I really did it.
When I see the underpass for where the tunnel where you go through for the Eastern Continental Divide, it's a real short tunnel with overpass over top of it, for the cars. I see 2 people are at the Eastern Continental Divide already, and they're taking pictures, and I kind of ride up there and wait my turn, and I offer to take a picture for them. And I find out it's a couple people from the Nashville, Tennessee, and they had made a trip up to ride the Great Allegheny Passage, and they rode from Pittsburgh to Cumberland, and they're going to take the train back to Pittsburgh and get their vehicle and ride home. And that's when it kind of hit me of how big the Gap Trail is. I kind of take it for granted because I'm an hour away, half an hour at some points where the trail is, and I kind of took it for granted how big this was and how many people ride this thing. 1 million people a year roughly ride parts of it, and they ride along it. But these people, their vacation for the year was coming up here and riding the Great Allegheny Passage, and that kind of gave me a better understanding of the magnitude of the Great Allegheny Passage. It's one of the top 10 bike trails in the whole country. So, and it's only at points a half an hour away from my house. So you can kind of take stuff like that for granted when you live that close to it. But it was bigger than I thought it was at that point. I realized how big this trail is. Now, the Eastern Continental Divide is the hydrological divide between the east and west. So everything to the east of the Eastern Continental Divide, the watershed goes to the ocean. Everything to the west of the watershed goes to the Mississippi River and to the Gulf of Mexico. So it's kind of the border of where the water flows. So if it's to the west, it goes to the Gulf of Mexico. If it's to the east, it goes to the ocean. So it's the highest point on the Gap Trail. There's a sign, "You are here." And when I got there, I had a major adrenaline dump. And I've been preparing for this for so long that I had to take about 15, 20 minutes and sit there and just kind of flow through the process, because at this point, I know I am at the top of the mountain, and everything I have to do from now till I get to Pittsburgh is basically downhill. There's still uphills. I mean, you're not going to just coast down to Pittsburgh, but I knew my hardest climb was over. And I'd worried about this for months, so all my adrenaline's dumping, and I sit and take about a 20-minute break. When I get back on my bike, I know my next stop is Myersdale. Myersdale is a cool little town, the maple festivals and stuff like that. It's a big maple syrup town. So when you come into Myersdale, it's about mile 31, And Myersdale is the first real town you come into, and there's going to be the Western Maryland Railway stations there, and there's bed and breakfast. There's also a campground there. So the Maple Festival campground is in Myersdale. So it's actually the first campground you come to when you're on the Great Allegheny Passage. As far as bed and breakfast goes, there's a lot of stops you can make. There's ones in Frostburg, there's ones in Myersdale, and there's ones the whole way down through to Pittsburgh. As far as campgrounds go, though, there's only a few places to stop on the eastern side of the trail. So once you get to Ohiopyle, there's more options going from Ohiopyle to Pittsburgh than there are from Ohiopyle to Cumberland. So there's not a whole lot of campground choices between Cumberland and Ohiopyle. So, but the first one you come to is the Maple Festival campground, which is about mile marker 31 on the Gap Trail. So there's like gift shops there. There's a lot of people riding, and it's just the first place you come to where you see groups of people, and they're all talking and chatting, and it was very nice, talking to people. The next stage of the journey is pretty crazy. So you hit the Salisbury Viaduct at mile marker 34. 34 miles in. It's a trestle that's 2,000 feet long and 100 feet in the air, and it crosses over Route 219 and the Castleman River. And when you start crossing it, it's like the coolest feeling in the world because you're just up above everything. Like I said, you're 100 feet in the air over Route 219, and I've driven under it a bunch of times, but this is the first time I was ever on it, and it was really cool. And it's a 2,000 foot trestle that was made in 1998. They decked it for biking and hiking across it, and it's really cool. If you don't even want to ride on the Gap Trail, you just want to see something cool, go down there and check out the Salisbury Viaduct. But it's at mile marker 34 on the Gap Trail. So I make it to mile marker 36, which is Garrett. Garrett has a pavilion with a picnic table and bathroom and a water pump. This is where I'm going to sit down and eat my lunch. It's about 1:30 in the afternoon. And I decided when I was planning my trip to make it very budget friendly. I could have bought just the backpacking meals, which were like the Mountain House meals or whatever, but they're like $10 or $12 a piece, and I wanted to make it as budget friendly as possible. So I bought Knorr rice and noodle sides for my trip, and I bought some packs of meat. Like I had for lunch that day, I had barbecued pulled pork and pulled pork and barbecue sauce from Great Value. The little packs, they're like $1.25 a piece. I had a couple of those, and I had a rice side. And my rice side, I had to cook it. And the way you cook on a backpacking or bikepacking trip is you boil water and you dump it into a bag and let it cook for 15 minutes on its own. So I bought on a website called Garage Grown Gear. Garage Grown Gear is for small cottage companies that can get their camping gear out there. So they do a lot with ultralight backpacking and these small cottage industry companies. So cottage industry is basically someone who doesn't have the distribution backing of big corporate companies. This Garage Grown Gear website, garagegrowngear.com, finds the coolest stuff. They have like a lot of cool gadgets and gizmos and ultralight camping stuff. And that's where I got this. It was called a Big Sky thermal pouch. It's a kind of like a thermal blanket that I put around my food to keep it warm while I was cooking. So I have this thing, and I have a silicone reusable bag inside there, and I put my rice side in this, and I boil my water and I dump it in there, and you let it cook for 15 minutes. As I'm cooking my stuff, I was talking to my wife on the phone and just telling her how my day was going and how everything was going good, to the point where I was kind of getting relaxed and eating. My favorite thing was Sour Patch Kid watermelons. I was eating my Sour Patch Kid watermelons, talking to my wife, waiting for my stuff to cook. After my food cooks, as I was sitting there, I kind of just jumped up and packed all my stuff up real quick, and I was like, I have to keep moving because I still have 25 miles to ride. And I start riding again. My next thing I came to was Rockwood. Rockwood was 43 miles into the trip. And there's stuff in Rockwood like a bike shop. There's Rockwood Trail bike shops there. There's restaurants. There's bed and breakfasts in Rockwood. but I really didn't need anything, so I just ate lunch and I'm just gonna keep going. But the next part of my trip from Rockwood to Markleton, which is about mile marker 50, was probably the worst part of my trip. And I'm not saying that any part was bad of my trip, but I'm saying it was the worst part because I was by myself, and this stretch, I called it the Green Tunnel because it was just the trees wrapped around the trail, and you follow the Castleman River for 10 or 12 miles, and it all looks the same. And if I'd had someone with me to talk to, it might have made things a little bit better. But for me, it was just kind of like, yeah, kind of boring. And it was just monotonous for 10 or 12 miles. So for me, that was probably the worst part of my trip. Not because it was nice. I mean, it was beautiful. You stopped and looked around. It was beautiful. The Castleman River's right there. You're on this nice trail. Everything's green. But it all looked the same for 12 miles. Once I come down into Markleton, which is about mile marker 50 on the trail, there's not a whole lot of change. You cross over a road. When you cross over the road, there's a little station there, and there's a guest book. So I signed the guest book, and I recommend if you go on a trail, sign a guest book. There's a place you can sit down. There's a log made into a chair, and you can sit there and sign a guest book. But I read through the guest book a little bit, and you just see people from different areas traveling along the Gap Trail. As I follow down a little further, you get to mile marker 52, which is the Pinkerton High and Low Bridge and a Pinkerton Tunnel. So that was kind of the first breakup of this green tunnel I got to, and it was kind of exciting for me. So you go across these bridges, and it's pretty amazing how they have everything groomed and well taken care of. Like I really give it to people who take care of the Gap Trail, that it's really well maintained. So you cross the High and Low Bridge, Pinkerton High and Low Bridge, go through the Pinkerton Tunnel, and I know at this point I'm 52 miles into my trip, and I'm almost done for the day. As I keep going down, I progress into Confluence, Pennsylvania, and I know my campground's at mile marker 61. So I cross over the bridge, and I can see the entrance to the campground. Now, I had to book this campground in advance on recreation.gov. And it was about $35 for a site for one night with electricity, and I got a full hookup sites, but I didn't need all that stuff. But I just wanted the electric hookups so I could charge my battery packs and my phone and my watch. So I knew my second and third day were going to be primitive camping, and that's why I chose the electricity for the first night. As I get to the campground, it's really nice, and I get to the site, and I'm setting up, and I'm talking to the people who camp right next to me, and they're actually from the same town that I'm from. They're from Johnstown, and they're down there camping for the weekend with their friends. They have a boat on the Yauk River Lake, and I'm talking to them, so I kind of feel good that I can just leave my stuff there, and they're going to kind of watch it, and no one's going to steal my stuff. So I went and got a shower. And once my campsite was all set up, I set up my $7 tent, and I went and got a shower, and it was the best feeling in the world. I'd carried a powdered soap and very microfiber towels and these small compact camping towels and backpacking towels with me. So I got all showered up, and I'm like, at this point, I'm feeling great. I'm out of my sweaty clothes. I feel good. So I decided I'm going fishing. I carried an ultralight fishing rod with me for the whole trip. I'm gonna go fishing. So I ended up going down by the spillway by the Yauk Lake, and I'm fishing for a little bit, but there was nowhere to sit down, and I was trying to sit on the rocks, but my butt hurt from riding 60 miles on a bike that day, so I didn't want to sit on any rock and fish. So I decided to give that up and go back to the campsite and cook dinner. The main thing I learned my first day was never to pass up a cold drink. So I got back on my bike after I showered and everything, and I rode up to that Overflow Frosty Freeze, and I got an ice cream cone, and I got a big bottle of Mountain Dew, which I don't drink Mountain Dew hardly ever, but I wanted something cold and something with some caffeine to get me going. So I learned from that day, my first day, that never pass up a cold drink. Yes, there's water all along the trail. There was places to stop and get water, but when it's 95 degrees out, water coming out of the pump is cool at best. It's usually just warm water you're getting out. So for the whole day of riding 61 miles, I did it with warm water. And so going on to the next day, all I had in my mind was never pass up a cold drink. But that finishes up my first day of my trip, and I ended up going, sitting at the picnic table, hanging out for a while, and checking out my new lantern. I have a fire maple little lantern that attaches the isobutane canister. It's a cool little lantern my wife bought me, and yeah, so that wraps up my first day, and I'll get into my next part of the trip on the next episode. So I know this was long and it was kind of drawn out, but just kind of describing how my day went in the process of doing this, and why I rode from Cumberland to Pittsburgh, not Pittsburgh to Cumberland, and some of the struggles that I had and some of the thoughts that I had. So I know it was a long video, but if you made it this far, please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos. Thanks.